This will be a response to Dan Ryan's personal story in regards to the arts. When I was 4, my mom didn't really have a class for me to go to as her little black child in the city of Portland, Oregon. So my mom became my number one arts provider in my community. While I stayed in the arts throughout my early childhood career and well into high school, by the time I got to the University of Oregon and went to the theater department to take class in production, they really didn't know what to do with me, or they really didn't integrate me into the curriculums that they were using. Instead, I was given some fabric and told to make water for a summer production, which was basically a solo experience without being in the theater department. Or we'll say without being integrated into the theater department. When I returned home from the University of Oregon without a degree, as I, on campus, continually did my arts to the point of selling things on campus while taking classes, selling my work. I returned home to work in community and create arts in my community for young people who did not have the advantages of being exposed to an arts process that related to them. In my neighborhood, you had to be entrepreneurial about making arts happen. In my neighborhood, you had to create what you wanted to have happen for the people who lived around you. Since I'm from the Albina neighborhood, there were very little times when things were positioned in our community that would last and foster young artists. The Albina Community Center being one of the spaces that I was exposed to upon returning, where I met mentors, etc., who looked like me and helped me develop myself into a better artist as a young person. At the same time, my mentors helped me see and understand the inequities of arts opportunities for people who looked like me. Therefore, we had to come up with our own creative ways of being able to do the same arts that other communities had, but minus the budget, or creating the budget out of what we had. Therefore, I went to work helping start things like Portland Black Repertory Theater and other theater companies along the way. There were several, as well as creating my own work and using community members to help me do that, or giving them the opportunity to be with me in a performance venue. So I proceeded to make clothing and do fashion shows, do plays, costumes, sets, and the things I grew up with, thanks to my mom once again, as I was a theater baby and the repository of a very rich cultural heritage here in Portland that revolved around Black artists of all types, performance artists, music artists, visual artists, etc. It all came from my community because we did not have the spaces to go to where we were welcome, or the funding to support what we wanted to do on a regular basis. At this point, realizing that I came from an educational system that either was raising me to be a janitor, a prisoner, or dead, I decided to take things into my own hands and start my entrepreneurship, which would help me change the cultural fabric of the city that I lived in. Since there was very little set out for me, I created my own plate to put things on so that I could thrive as opposed to be neglected. So I developed curriculum that would allow me to insert myself into the school systems and bring about cultural awareness through my performances and my artistry, visual and performing. I gathered a group together and we continued to do that through many years of school performances, lectures, demonstrations, exhibits, etc. Cultural heritage came to the forefront of my thinking as I realized that in this society, in this state, in this city, basically I was living a culture that was being marooned in plain sight due to whatever obligations that could happen financially to help my community thrive, as well as the people who look like me. Most of this came to a head when I met the people from the Metropolitan Arts Commission. This would be the precursor for the Regional Arts and Culture Council. Let's see, it says insert personal story here. Well, when I was very young, my sister and I grew up in a household where, because we had such a close-knit community in Albina, all of the black artisans, all of the black musicians, all of the black dancers, etc., came to our house for an extended period of time. I would say for about 10 years, I was raised under these artists' purview prior to coming to the Albina Arts Center. So now I can realize that by the age of 17, when I had a portfolio and a healthy understanding of what a contract is and what a budget is, I realized I probably, through community, had what would be called my bachelor's in the arts if I was in an academic setting. But since I wasn't in an academic setting and I was in a pure arts setting, that part of my brain was extremely developed for being able to maintain culture and do community work. And while the academic setting did not always know what to do with me, as an extreme student whose talent kind of superseded some questions. But my community always knew what to do with me because they would continually reinforce and source me materials that I would cherish forever and learn how to archive and keep culturally intact. At this point, I can probably clearly say I learned how to deal with being marooned and becoming a maroon, which has a historical history in terms of black people in the Western world. I also realized that all of the people in my village were just like me. We all were talented. We all knew how to survive in a world that would maroon us. We all knew how to develop things out of nothing and be thoroughly entrepreneurial in our endeavors in order to survive and thrive culturally. As I began to expand my cultural awareness, I went from having a village of a 20-mile radius to a village of a 300-mile radius, and doing work in Washington State and Seattle. I developed further and began to do things in 2 states, 2 cities, all culturally based in my culture and the culture of people who looked like me. And as I met people who were going through this same process of marooning, we'll call it, dealing with a social structure that basically ignored us, we spent a lot of time sharing our ideas, our philosophies, our cultures, because coming from different neighborhoods and different cities means you may have different cultures pending where your family came from. So we started to develop ourselves in what we called a corridor between Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. As I grew into what I now understand would be the equivalent of a community master's program, sharing of these ideas and creating them through productions, etc., and bringing things to fruition became the anti-work of the community and society that surrounded me. Therefore, we had to only rely on things and people who helped us produce. This is where the Regional Arts and Culture Council came into play in my career by offering technical assistance, educational moments, grant writing workshops, etc., 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 that shifted into being more relevant to people who look like me during stressful times nationally. We'll just keep it at that to save time. At the same time, I also realized that my community had been prepping me to be competitive in the global marketplace. And therefore, as I grew in my career in regards to academia, I started being able to lecture, teach, advise in the academic environment because I had become what most of the students were trying to learn about. So I would say that through this practice of a marooning of the mind, then I became a resource that academia would find necessary to use because of the neglect of the community of people who look like me into a reliance on understanding the community of people who look like me. As a cultural technician, it became very apparent that the Regional Arts and Culture Council helped me develop my skills for building curriculum, my skills for performance, my skills for mentoring, etc., for the people in my community who look like me, as well as others. I have taught in many educational institutions. I have taught in many specified schools, etc., and been in several environments, we'll say from prison programs to special needs programs through the development of my skills. The Regional Arts and Culture Council played a very big part in keeping me in Portland, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, etc., to work and live and thrive. Outside of some of those opportunities, I would have left long ago and never been able to influence the many students I've had, the many colleagues I've had, my peers, etc.